Lauren, welcome. She's our next speaker here. And we want to get started right away, right? So I will go ahead and pass it to you, Lauren, and you can start sharing your screen.
Thanks, Haley. Yeah, let me get my slides up here. Excellent. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back from the break. My name is Lauren Snyder, and I'm really happy to be here today to share some lessons and frameworks to discover and hone your management style. So about 10 years ago, when I first went to work at a startup, I wasn't even really sure that I wanted to be a people manager. But fortunately for me, my manager at the time nudged me to try it, and I've never looked back. So since then, I've led teams of a variety of sizes and disciplines at primarily growth stage technology companies. So, despite my initial hesitancy to become a people manager, I found it to be truly one of the most challenging and rewarding aspects of my career so far. So, I'm excited to be here today to talk more about management styles. So, what's your management style? I'm sure most people on the call have been asked some flavor of this question before. And if you're anything like me, you might have struggled to answer it at some point in your career. So, outside of acing an interview question, it can be extremely valuable to consciously craft your management style. So, exploring and understanding your own style allows you to do four key things. First, establish your leadership identity. This goes with you no matter what role that you're in. Second, making tough decisions and navigating ambiguity. Third, getting the most out of your teams, which hopefully that's something all of us are here to do. And fourth, find a role and network that balances and challenges you. So over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to cover two topics. First is some common management styles and categories that might describe you. And second, a flexible framework to discover and adjust your own management style and evolve as a leader. So here's some common management and leadership style categories. You could uncover these and dozens more definitions for possible management styles, but these are a few that come up pretty often. If one of these styles that listed is here that resonates with you, that's great. However, I think some of you might find yourself that this isn't really the full picture of how you would describe your style. And describing yourself in one of these styles listed wouldn't necessarily be wrong, but it may just come across as one note or rigid depending on your team and your role. For example, one memorable manager that I had earlier in my career was strictly a Socratic leader. So Socratic leadership style, for those of you who aren't familiar, are leaders who really favor leading with questions instead of telling employees what to do or being more directive. This was a challenge for me and my Socratic manager when I went to build my first financial model. I had never really seen or built a financial model before, so this is a first time for me. And my Socratic method manager, who is very attached to her style, kept asking me things like, what do you think that a financial model should look like? Or how do you think that we should build it? I was totally stumped. So I was getting more and more frustrated. I had no baseline knowledge of the topic and no context about where to start. And she was persistent about trying to answer with a question whenever I would ask for direction. So this put us in this infinite loop where she was really attached to her style and I really couldn't follow. Um, Eventually, I sought out a member of another team to walk me through a model or two and share a file that I could use as a guide and template as I built my own. So her special attachment to her style really broke down for me as an employee, and I vowed to find more nuance if I ever became a manager. Of course, easier said than done. So instead of choosing a singular approach to your management style or staying set in your ways if your team is struggling, I propose taking a slightly more exploratory and personalized approach. So this may seem a little funny to have on a slide, but I'm going to get to the point here. I recommend that as leaders and managers, we use this acronym SWEAT to sweat our management styles. SWEAT is an acronym. The S starts with start with your why. W is work backwards. E, expand your toolkit. A, ask for feedback and adjust accordingly. And T, try it out. So that's a lot to unpack. I'll walk through each of these letters and a little bit more about what they might mean to help you better understand and identify your style. So S, start with why. This is really important because it's up to you to decide for yourself why discovering and honing your management style is important to you. This could be, maybe you're struggling to inspire high performance on your team. Maybe you're hoping to lead larger and more diverse teams, or you're just faced with difficult decisions at work and not really sure how to approach them. So finding and adjusting your style can be useful for unlocking these really challenging leadership situations. And personally, this was an important step for me because until I'd been managing a few years, I was kind of just winging it with my management style. And this meant, I was really only able to inspire great performance if my natural leadership tendencies happened to resonate with the individual team member that I was leading. So this might be okay if you're leading like one or two people who are sort of like you or have similar tendencies. But as the teams I led grew larger and more diverse and more senior, my style really wasn't serving me or my team. So now I've sort of reflected on why my management style is important to me. And I do reflection on this about once a quarter, which allows me to be just a little bit more thoughtful about the leader that I want to be and helps me sort of find the roles and teams that might complement and effectively challenge my style. So understand your why, revisit it a few times a year, and this can really help you self-assess when you might want to adjust based on your circumstances or a team member's needs. W stands with work backwards. So you want to begin with the end in mind. How might you hope to describe your leadership style 3, 6, 10 years from now? How would you want your team to describe your style? So if you think about a common leadership question that you might get in an interview a few years from now, someone might ask, tell me about a time when you had to manage a difficult employee. You don't necessarily have to go through that to unpack your management style and think about how your authentic manager self and your style might actually respond. So it can be helpful to sort of work backwards from those visionary plans of what your style might be in a few years and write down some answers to those hypothetical questions to help you tailor how your style might end up and how you might want to get there. It can be helpful to write down your answers to these questions and then pair them with results from things like Myers-Briggs or a DISC assessment or the Clifton Strengths Finders is also a really good one. These assessments can be a powerful way to use your strengths when you pair them with your plan to work backwards from your ideal style. E is for expand your toolkit. So this is where you can get curious and explore, better evolve your style. This might include things like thinking about some traits or elements of leadership styles that you've seen out in the world, but you don't commonly tap into. This can mean also thinking about the best managers that you worked with and seeing if there are things that they're doing that you could emulate in your style. So broadening your toolkit can be a great time to listen to leadership podcasts or read some memoirs from leaders that you admire. And this can also mean talking to leaders who are in and outside of your industry to see how other people might be doing something that you could borrow and learn from. So talking to trusted mentors and friends has also been a great way to broaden my toolkit and also potentially uncover some biases that might be inherent to my style and overcome them. A is ask for feedback. So this step really allows you to take your style authentically to the next level. This can include things like gathering results from performance evaluation or a start, stop, continue evaluation if your team has those. You can ask your team members as well, more informally outside of those processes. Some questions like what motivates them or how do they like to be recognized? These can be great clues of how you can map your style and adjust them to the needs of your team. So you don't have to adjust everything, and you obviously don't want to do anything that feels inauthentic to you, but this allows you to really get the feedback to find adjustments that would make an impact to the team that you're leading at the time. For example, I had kind of a style blind spot where, again, earlier in my career, I thought that my style was super supportive, but the feedback that I got from my team members was that they were not sort of feeling the loving feedback as much as the critical feedback. So I think this was my tendency to really want to lead high performing teams, but then that feedback helped me acknowledge that I could achieve that same goal with more balance around providing more constructive praise as well as the critical feedback. So to overcome this kind of style habit that I had, I did two things. First, I set up just a personal recurring weekly Slack reminder to myself so that I would be sure to not let a week pass without recognizing and praising something positive that my team did. Second, I also adjusted how I was providing this specific praise. If the team member, for instance, really liked getting public recognition, I would give them a shout out in all hands, while other people may have preferred the praise more like privately in a one-on-one. So these two small habit changes really helped me align my style with the needs of my team. And that's something that they immediately recognized and appreciated. So I think another tip here is that you can definitely write down some of these feedback points that you're getting, because I've found that once you feel like something is your style, it can be easy to stay in that habit. So if you're getting feedback from your team that resonates with you, definitely write it down and then try and rebuild a new habit into your style based on that feedback that you're getting. Finally, the T in sweat is you get to test and iterate. Um, just remember that style evolves. You don't have to pick a label or an answer to an interview question and then stick with it for the rest of your career. If you've identified your style, you can also use this time to sort of test it out on a tough decision. So for example, you might be changing your hybrid or remote policies at work, and then your style can give you clues and direction about how you might approach that change, whether that's the way you communicate it, the change management tactics you use with your team, or how you might handle any conflicts that might come up. So use these real life scenarios to put your management style to the test, and make sure that also how you define and describe your management style actually matches your day-to-day actions so that it feels authentic and allows you to really leverage your style in the best way possible. So in summary, I know we've covered a lot, but we've got some common styles and categories that you can further explore, learn more about if you saw something on that slide that resonated with you. And then we've also covered the Sweat Your Style framework that allows you to start with why, work backwards, expand your toolkit, ask for feedback, and then try it out. So small call to action, just like Lena had in her presentation, just spend a few minutes this week jotting down a few aspects of your management style, or maybe starting with your why, because this can allow you to find a few areas where you might want to flex, and you can try those out and see how it goes. I would love to hear if people have questions. I haven't been really monitoring the chat, but Haley, do you have any questions that came
Yeah, I
in?
definitely do. So that's great. And you guys have been submitting those questions. Keep it going. If you just want to chat to the host, you can too. I see a couple of you did. But going through the list here, and I love this one because feedback comes up time and time again, especially here at Marlow. And I know you kind of mentioned it before, but often it leads to this kind of just keep doing what you're doing. How do you recommend getting really honest answers from your team, which you need in order to kind of move forward?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think there's sometimes this almost like power imbalance, even if you're not conscious of it, that team members don't want to tell their manager that something that they're doing, that the manager is doing, annoys them or isn't working for them. So I think, first and foremost, know your team, know if you've created sort of that culture of safety, know that if someone gives you feedback and you're not asking for it or not expecting it, that you're reacting in a way that sort of makes them want to give you more feedback. I've heard some managers who are like, I ask for feedback all the time, and then when they get it, they sort of react poorly. So I think undoing some of those habits and really making sure that you're the type of manager who is sort of open door and reacts well when they get feedback. I think that's some kind of habits to practice. Other ways that I think you can get it, sometimes maybe through an anonymous channel, maybe more through your peers. So if you have other management peers that you can talk to within your organization, they may have picked up things from your team. And then you also don't have to ask it specific to you. You don't have to ask your team, hey, what am I doing that you don't like that I should change? But more like those open-ended questions about them, like make it about them instead of about you. Things like what motivates them, how do they like to communicate, how do they like to give and receive feedback, and you might get some hints or clues from their answers.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing kind of pivoting, but you did mention, leaning on these resources. I kind of wonder, what are your favorite resources lately that you've kind of leaned on?
Yeah, there's a really great podcast that I like. I think it's by Harvard Business Review called Coaching Real Leaders, where there's actually individual leaders at various stages of their career that talk with a career coach through specific examples that they're working through. So that's a podcast that I really love. And then a sort of leadership book that I read recently was The Ride of a Lifetime by the
Mhm.
Disney CEO. And I thought that was really interesting to sort of get out of my own industry in my own sort of world and read about how another leader approaches some really challenging problems.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely a different world. But we'll
Yes.
move on. Everyone submitted questions ahead of time. I've compiled them in case one of these questions was yours that you submitted. We'll try to get through as many as possible here. So just to read through, what are some common pitfalls or mistakes that new managers should be aware of when developing their management style? How do you avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah, I will say I speak from experience because I made some of them myself. I think I mentioned one earlier on that I think sometimes just winging it and being like, I don't need to figure it out. I'll it'll just come to me. Sort of that is a common mistake that I've made myself and seen others make. And I think this also kind of goes back to something that Lena was talking about in her presentation around defining your values. Like that takes some conscious work. It doesn't have to be a super long exercise, but doing some of that work can kind of help you from winging it and just being more conscious and authentic. I also think doing some one size fits all management is something that I did earlier in my career that didn't really serve me for too long and is a common mistake, thinking that, oh, the way that I manage one person is the way that I should manage every person. They should adjust to me. And I guess this is my personal take, but I think as a leader, you can be in that position to actually flex and adjust to your team instead. So those I think are a couple of common mistakes that I've seen or that I've made, but would be curious as well to hear from others if they have thoughts.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a popular scenario. So thank you
Hmm.
for covering it and being really honest with that because it's true and we're not perfect.
That's right.
Speaking of, uh this one has an interesting situation. I feel as though my preferred management style, which is really structured, guidance, and a lot of oversight clashes, sorry, with the culture of my organization and the expectations of the team. How can I navigate that situation?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think
Yeah.
this sort of mismatch is something that you may encounter at various points throughout your career. I think if you've done some of the um, sweat work, you're starting with why, you're exploring your own style, you may actually be able to avoid some of those mismatches throughout your career because as you're having conversations, you're better able to align yourself to organizations that feel like very supportive of your style. If you haven't or if you end up getting surprised, that's okay too. I think again, I would go back to looking at the sweat framework. So why is my style this way? Why is it different from other people or this organization? What's challenging about that? You can also explore by, what can I learn from this other style? Is there something that maybe I could do or change or improve to adjust to this environment? And then asking for feedback, I think is a really important one too. Maybe that's from your team, maybe it's from your leader to understand what's working about the style, how am I getting results in this different environment, and then maybe testing and trying out some different things. I don't think that it's again a one size fits all, so different styles can coexist. I think it's just about how you do some self-reflection and then do reflection on the organization to see what's working and what's not, and communicating with your team and your leadership as well about differences that you're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. And there is a lot of conflict to that. And I know that the chat and the questions kind of centered around that um idea of conflict is sometimes management styles don't line up. And so I think that's really, really helpful for people to hear that, teams are facing this and this is a real
Hmm.
problem and a real everyday situation that people go through. Um, let's see. We addressed this. This is a great question. I know someone just typed it in. A little bit more about hesitation for that formal feedback. I know you kind of touched that earlier on there. I'm wondering here, how do you, when you're going through this kind of give and pull a little bit with that feedback, how do you kind of still make sure that your team's performing just as well as they need to be while you kind of start to adjust this management style?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. You don't have to be like, I'm going to stick to my style or I'm going to have a high performing team. Like, I think that those things can coexist. I think, again, this is a great way to sort of open up communication with your team, acknowledging things like, hey, it would usually be my style to check in every day and do a stand up if you're someone who likes more oversight. Maybe your team is clashing with that, or they're not performing in that kind of structured framework. So you could say, we're going to change this from a daily stand up to a weekly sync. And, this is a little bit uncomfortable for me, but I want to see how it goes. Like, I'm really trusting you all to provide me that same level of communication and tell me how it's working. So I think you can sort of have more open and more honest conversations about, what is natural for you in your style, where you're sort of flexing. And I think that that also opens up the conversation with team being like, oh yeah, it's hard for us to perform if this happens, or like it's easier for us to meet our deadlines if, you know, this is the type of environment that we work in. And so having those kinds of conversations, I think, can really be powerful because your team is trying to figure out their style as well. And that can be a really humbling experience, I think, for everyone to just have those conversations.
Yeah, I think those conversations require a lot of honesty. How do you get them to
Mhm.
be that honest?
Yeah, that's a bit of a practice. I think that that's a bit of trust building, right? It's saying, hey, we're going to try something out and it's okay if it doesn't work, or, if it does work, I want to know why. Like, I'm going out of my comfort zone, and sort of, again, that leading by example, saying, I'm going a little bit out of my comfort zone. I'd love, like, can you meet me there? And then, of course, building that trust. So when they do give you feedback, how are you actioning on it? How are you sort of proving to the team that when they're giving you their honesty, there's no retaliation, there is no defensiveness, they can sort of trust that you're going to respond just as openly as you would hope that they would.
I think we all have these kind of biases when it comes to management styles, and I want to address that too, is that we kind of view other management styles as not so great. Um, you know what I mean? So is there anyone that you would particularly come up that might be troublesome in this situation, or when dealing with teams that people have, that mid-level managers have? Is there something that, we need to branch out from a little bit? Any kind of red flags that we can sense and how we manage others?
Yeah, I think I'll say there's no such thing as a wrong
Mhm.
management style, as long as you're sort of treating people relatively fair. Like, you're obviously, you want to have a baseline of fairness and competence, and I sort of assume that all of the participants here are doing that, but there's not anything necessarily wrong with being a little bit on the micromanaging side, or being more structured or more oversight, or being more on the laissez-faire side and being kind of more hands off. I think it's more about recognizing what are the strengths of your team, what are the things that are happening in your organization. And again, there's no sort of one right way to do it. It's more about sort of adjusting and finding the way that both feels authentic to you and helps you sort of and your team get to the outcomes that you want, and being open to the fact that there are other ideas and other ways, many ways to achieve those outcomes.
Awesome. Well, Lauren, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Everyone, I'm going to message out some resources in finding and honing your management style if you would like a quiz to go ahead and take. But